You are holding a flashlight. Perhaps you do not realize it. Perhaps you believe you came here simply to listen, to pass the time, to indulge a mild curiosity about the dark. But no, you came here because something in you, something old, something that predates reason itself, needed to look at the shadows and confirm they were empty. They are not empty. Tonight I have 3 stories for you. 3 accounts of ordinary people who made the same foolhardy mistake. The mistake of assuming the world ends at the edge of the light, of assuming that what cannot be seen cannot see them in return. I will not promise you comfort. I will not promise you resolution. I will promise you only this, that by the end of tonight, you will understand why the flashlight matters, and why it is never quite enough. Welcome to Flashlight in the Dark. Allow me to tell you something, listener, about the nature of abandoned places, about what happens when a house, for a long, agonizingly long time, stands empty. For houses, you see, they do not truly empty. They merely... A man by the name of Arthur Voss did not believe in such things. He was an architect, a man of numbers, blueprints, rational angles and measurable spaces. The world, to him, was geometry, straight lines. And so, when the city council tasked him with conducting an inspection of the old manor on Linden Street, he accepted the assignment without the slightest tremor, without the slightest premonition. Ah, what noble ignorance. The manor had stood there for 70 years. Its last occupants, the Blackwell family, had vanished without warning in 1953. Not moved away, not relocated, vanished. Neighbors spoke of how one night light poured from the windows until the break of dawn, and by morning, silence. Doors locked from within, no bodies, no notes, only a silence which, according to those few who had dared approach the threshold, was a wrong silence, too dense, too full. Arthur entered the manor at 10:15 in the morning. October light lay across the floor in strips, dim, almost apologetic. The floorboards creaked beneath each step, not as old boards creak, but somehow differently, reluctantly, as though the house did not wish to be disturbed, yet lacked the means to resist. He passed through the entrance hall, past the staircase with its missing balusters, and entered what had once been the drawing room. And here the rational mind of the architect suffered its first fracture. The room was strange, not merely in its ruin, though ruin was everywhere. Wallpaper hanging in strips from greening walls, plaster collapsed in mounds upon the floor, boards buckled and split as though something had pressed against them from below. No, the room was strange in another sense entirely. It contained several objects, which did not belong to the desolation. An armchair, old, worn, yet standing perfectly upright, as though freshly positioned. A birdcage suspended from the ceiling, empty, yet swaying, in the complete absence of any draught. And in the far corner, a mannequin. A dressmaker's mannequin on a 3-legged stand. Upon it, a dress. Grey, long, in the fashion of the early last century. Dusty, like everything around it, and yet intact. Not a single tear, not a single flaw. The dress was in perfect condition. It appeared as though it had been worn quite recently. Arthur noted this in his logbook. Mannequin with dress, origin unknown, condition good, query counsel. He was methodical, he was composed, he was wholly unprepared for what followed. In the corner stood a mirror, in a heavy gilded frame, cracked, clouded, webbed with fractures. Arthur raised his phone to photograph it for the report and caught his own reflection in the screen. Only not quite his own. The reflection in the mirror looked at him. That was normal, but it looked slightly differently. The head was tilted at an angle Arthur had not assumed. The right hand raised, though his own right hand held the phone against his chest. And the expression on the face, the expression was not his. He lowered the phone, looked at the mirror directly. The reflection stared back with his own eyes. Correct eyes, normal posture, normal expression. A trick of shadows, he told himself aloud. His voice rang unexpectedly quiet in that room, almost absorbed. He continued the inspection. The second floor, the third, the attic with its collapsed roof. All methodical, all documented. He had almost convinced himself that the mirror was simply old, imperfect, when he noticed the room had grown darker. Not because the sun had retreated behind clouds. No, the darkness deepened from within, as though shadows condensed from the very walls, slowly as water rises in a flooding cellar. And the smell, sweet, putrid, almost floral, like a bouquet left to rot in the sun. A smell that corresponded to nothing rational in that room. Arthur decided to leave. He stepped toward the door and stopped. In the doorway, in the darkness of the corridor, something stood. Not a person. The silhouette was human only in the most approximate sense. Too pale, too still. The face, if it could be called a face, was turned toward him, and within it were eyes. White, without pupils, without irises. Simply white voids, glowing in the darkness of the corridor with the same indifferent constancy as foxfire glows in a marshy night. It did not move. It merely watched. And in that gaze there was neither malice nor hunger, nor anything Arthur could recognize. There was only recognition. Cold, boundless recognition, as though this thing had seen him before, as though it had been waiting for him, for a long time, for a very, very long time. The phone in his hand went dark. Not a dead battery, it simply went dark. Silence descended upon the room with such physical density that Arthur felt pressure building in his ears. And then the mannequin in the corner turned its head. Slowly, without a jerk, without a creak, it simply turned its head upon its headless neck. The faceless torso directed itself toward him with the same dead attention as the creature in the doorway. And the dress upon it began to move. Not from wind, no. It moved as clothing moves upon a living body that breathes. Arthur screamed, or believed he screamed. The sound died in his throat, consumed by that room, those walls, that house which had long since learned to take everything that entered it. They found him 3 days later, seated in that very armchair, upright, perfectly positioned, alive, physically unharmed. He stared directly ahead with an arrested gaze, and when asked what had happened, he said only one thing. It is still there, in the mirror, watching. After that, he spoke no further, never again. The manor on Linden Street was demolished the following month. The mirror was removed for transfer to the city archive. But the removers tasked with delivering it never reached their destination. The van was found at the roadside, doors open, mirror intact. The removers had vanished. Houses, listener, do not truly empty. They merely change tenants. And so the mirror endures, patient, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to stand before it and wonder what looks back. But perhaps you find some small comfort in that tale, listener. After all, one must enter such a place. One must cross the threshold willingly. One must walk up the stairs, raise the lantern, peer into the dark corner where the thing waits. How reassuring. Allow me, then, to disabuse you of that comfort entirely. For our second story concerns a place that required no entry, no threshold crossed, no invitation accepted in any conscious sense. It only required that 4 people looked up at a window in the dark, and that one of them looked back just a moment too long. The second account, the manor at the edge of night. There are places which draw, not through beauty, no, not through comfort or any promise of peace. They draw through something else entirely, something that lives deeper than instinct, in that part of the human psyche which civilization has so carefully walled up beneath layers of reason and routine, that part which still remembers what lurks in the dark. 4 young people found the manor at the bend of an old road at the end of August. They were headed to the lake, with tents, with cheap wine, with that careless certainty in their own immortality, which is the privilege of youth and its curse equally. Marcus noticed it first. A fire in a window, a single flame on the second floor, flickering, alive, entirely out of place among the dark voids of the other windows. "Someone lives there," he said, and that was his first mistake. For the truth, and truth is rarely merciful, was that no one had lived in that house for a very long time, in any sense the human tongue assigns to the word living. The road to the manor appeared on no map. They noticed this later, when it was far too late to notice anything. The asphalt gave way to gravel, gravel to flattened grass, grass to something that resembled a path, but only in the way a trail left by something crawling resembles a path. The manor was enormous. Even in the darkness, even through the thickets of bramble and overgrown shrubbery, enormous and somehow significant. Not in any architectural sense, no, in the way a black hole is significant, as something around which space bends, toward which all things inevitably gravitate. The tower with its pointed roof disappeared into the sky, a sky where there were no stars. Above the house there were no stars. Marcus said it must be the clouds. The others said nothing. The gates were open. This should have alarmed them. It should have. But youth, of which I have already spoken with unconcealed sorrow, possesses a remarkable capacity to see invitation where reason warns of a trap. They went in. The path to the house was in a peculiar state, not simply overgrown, properly overgrown. The grass on either side stood like walls, but the path itself was clean, as though it were maintained, regularly, with manic precision, for someone or something that walked it frequently enough that the grass did not dare grow back. Victor, the most cautious of the 4, stopped at the gate. "I don't like it here," he said, briefly, without explanation, simply, "I don't like it." And that was the most sensible, the most precise observation of that entire evening, which, naturally, no one took seriously. They drew closer, the fire in the window still burning. Not a candle, not a lamp, something steady and motionless behind the latticed panes. And behind that fire, behind the glass, was a shadow, a silhouette, motionless, looking downward toward the 4 who stood with upturned faces. The shadow did not move. The shadow watched, and the house watched with it, through all its black windows, which were not merely windows but eyes of something ancient and immeasurably patient, something that had waited here long enough to learn not to hurry. Anna said, "Let's go inside." She said it calmly, with a smile, but later, much later, Marcus would recall that the smile had been wrong, that in her eyes there was something arrested, as though she had already heard something the others had not, as though the house had already begun a conversation with her. They did not go inside. Victor objected firmly enough, and they remained outside. They stood on the path and watched the fire in the window, until Marcus noticed something else. To the right of the house, in the thicket, almost invisible in the darkness, something stood. Not what stood in the window. Something different. It was not glowing. It was not looking at the window. It was looking at them, from the darkness of the bushes, motionless, with the same patient, inhuman attention as the house itself. And when Marcus directed his phone's torch toward it, the beam fell upon empty shrubbery. Nothing. But in the fraction of a moment before the light reached the spot where the creature had stood, in one single, indivisible instant, Marcus saw it withdraw its head. Slowly, without haste, in the manner of one who is not afraid of being discovered, but does not wish to be seen before the proper time. They ran. Of course they ran. It is the most human of all our reflexes, this flight from that which we cannot comprehend. They reached the car. They drove. Victor drove the entire distance to the highway without stopping once, and no one spoke. No one could speak. Except Anna. Anna looked through the rear window and smiled, the same wrong smile. And quietly, barely audibly, she was whispering something, in a language Marcus did not know, in a language which, he was absolutely certain, she should not have known either. They reached the city. Anna went home and went to sleep. In the morning she woke and remembered none of it. Not the manor, not the fire in the window, not what she had whispered in the car. But sometimes, at night, in that interval between sleep and waking, she sees the road, the path without grass, the gates that are always open, and the fire in the window, which always burns, for her. Manors, listener, do not stand where they were built. They stand where they must, for those they require, and they wait. 2 houses now. 2 sets of ordinary souls, undone by the extraordinary patience of the dark. Perhaps you have noticed a pattern, listener. Grand places, imposing structures, abandoned manors, crumbling estates. The sort of architecture that announces its menace plainly, if one possesses the wisdom to read it. Perhaps you tell yourself, I would never go to such a place. I would never wander down an unmapped road at midnight. I would never enter. How very sensible of you. Our final story, then, requires no abandoned manor, no derelict estate, no unmapped road. It requires only a garden. An ordinary, overgrown garden behind an ordinary inherited house on an ordinary street in an ordinary city. And a small door at the back, with the light on. The third and final account, the garden that remembers. Allow me, lastly, to speak of the quietest of fears. Not that which screams in the darkness, not that which batters at locked doors, but that which simply stands beyond the window and glows and waits for you to open the door yourself. Eleanor moved into the house on Birchwood Lane in late September. The house was old but well kept, from the outside. Within, it smelled of time and other people's decisions, as all inherited dwellings smell. The house had belonged to her aunt, who had died without a will, without any next of kin closer than Eleanor, and, as became apparent on the very first night, without any clear intention of remaining deceased. I beg your pardon. I am somewhat ahead of events, a bad habit of those who know the ending in advance. The garden behind the house was what unsettled Eleanor on that first evening, not because it was neglected, though it was, without question, neglected. The bushes and trees had grown so dense that they almost entirely concealed from view a small outbuilding in the far corner of the property, a little annex or shed with a wooden door, thick with rust-red moss and nearly swallowed by ivy. The garden unsettled her for a different reason. It made no sound. Outside, the street, passing cars, a dog somewhere in the distance. But in the garden there was silence. Perfect, sealed silence. No wind in the leaves, no crickets, no night birds. As though the garden existed beneath a glass dome. As though it was separated from the rest of the world by something. Eleanor closed the window and went to bed. This was sensible. This was rational. This, regrettably, changed nothing whatsoever. At 3 in the morning she was awakened by light. Not by a loud noise, not by a blow, not by anything that could be described with the word threat. Simply by light, soft, golden, seeping through the gaps in the curtains. She assumed it was a street lamp or a neighbor's floodlight. She rose to draw the curtains more tightly and saw the garden. The outbuilding at the far end of the garden was glowing. From within, through the cracks in the wooden door and a small, almost imperceptible window just beneath the roofline, poured that same steady, warm, wholly inexplicable light. There was no electricity out there. Eleanor knew this for certain, because the key to the outbuilding sat on her keyring alongside the house key, and she had not yet gone inside. No candles, no lanterns, no source, simply light. And the door of the outbuilding was open. It had been closed when Eleanor looked out at the garden that evening. It had been closed when she had gone to bed. But now, at 3 in the morning, in this silent, sealed garden, it stood ajar, softly, as though someone had only just stepped out, or was waiting for someone to step in. Eleanor was a clear-headed woman. She did not go to investigate. She called the police and received, naturally, a courteous reply that an officer would attend in the morning if the matter required no immediate intervention. She took a kitchen knife, old from her aunt's stores, unexpectedly heavy in the hand, and she remained at the window, watching the light, waiting. This was a mistake. Not because she did anything wrong, but because watching it, simply watching it, was already the mistake. For anything upon which one fixes one's gaze long enough in the night silence begins, in time, to gaze back. The light did not change. The door did not move. The garden was silent. But sometime near 4 in the morning, Eleanor noticed something that drove her back from the window. The grass in the garden, dense, tall, uncut, was bending, in a strip, slowly, sequentially, as grass bends beneath the feet of a person walking. The strip moved from the outbuilding toward the house, steady, methodical, unhurried, toward the back door. Eleanor reached the door in seconds, locked it, pressed her back against it, listened. Footsteps on the porch. Slow. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. As though something stood at the door, sniffed the air, recognized. And then, a knock. 3 strikes. Quiet, polite, almost domestic. Eleanor did not open the door. She sat against it until dawn, gripping the knife that had not the slightest bearing on anything, and she knew it. Dawn came slowly, reluctantly, as dawn always comes when it is needed most. The officer who arrived in the morning found the garden empty, the outbuilding locked, the light extinguished. But on the threshold of the back door there were marks, wet, dark, resembling the prints of bare feet in October. They led from the door back into the garden and dissolved into the grass, as all things dissolve that do not wish to be found. Eleanor vacated the house within the week. But before leaving, bags already packed, already standing at the gate with her case, she turned and looked at the outbuilding and saw that the door was open again. And in the opening, nothing. Darkness. Simply darkness, which looked at her with the same patient, inhuman attention with which it looks at her every night, ever since. The house was let to new tenants. They moved in during November. In December, they reported that a light sometimes burns in the garden. And here, listener, is the final and most cruel truth about the darkness. It does not pursue. It does not hunt. It remains in place, in a familiar garden, in an annex with a mossy door, beyond a window that is always lit. And it knows what none of us wish to know, that sooner or later, we all open the door. 3 stories, 3 doors, 3 flashlights that in the end were not enough. And now you sit, wherever you are, in the particular silence that follows a story well and truly told. Perhaps the room behind you feels slightly larger than it did before. Perhaps the window beside you holds your reflection just a half-second longer than it should. Perhaps somewhere in the distance, there is a sound you cannot immediately explain. Pay it no mind. Or do. It matters very little either way. I have told you tonight of mirrors that remember, of manors that choose their guests, of gardens that keep appointments with those who have never agreed to make them. And if there is a single thread that binds these accounts together, a single lesson etched into the marrow of each doomed soul who wandered through them, it is this. The darkness does not need to come for you. It is remarkably, inexhaustibly content to simply wait for you to come to it. So, check your locks, draw your curtains, convince yourself, as so many have convinced themselves before, that the light is sufficient, that the beam reaches far enough, that whatever lurks at the edge of its reach is, perhaps, nothing at all. And if you find yourself some night staring into the dark beyond your window, wondering what stares back, keep your flashlight close. It will not save you, but it will let you see what comes. This has been Flashlight in the Dark. If these shadows found their way to you tonight, you know what to do. Leave a light on and come back soon.